The paper I'm using is a good quality watercolor paper. That is, it's mostly cotton. It is cotton rag, all of it. It's 300 grams per square meter, or 140 pounds. And this particular one's made by Saunders of Waterford, and is a surface is known as a knot. It's not a rough surface, it's not a smooth surface, and to make it simple, they call it knot because it's neither of those, N-O-T. So that's the surface I'm using. I tend to use this sort of surface quite a lot with my painting now. And of the three things I'm going to mention, paper, paints and brushes, I actually think the most important is the paper, but that's for another discussion another time. So let's have a look at the paints I'm using. This is my palette, and these are all squeezed in from tubes into this palette, and later on I'll go through what each of these colors is, but I will always talk about the any particular color that I'm using at any time, and if I don't, please remind me. But I've got them all down here, and I'll be using those, and they were also shown on the Eventbrite site that you would have looked at, together with a range of brushes that I use. Now, I'm definitely going to use this big mop brush. It comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I mean, I've got a couple of others here, but the point about this one is that it holds a lot of water. It's a relatively cheap brush. It's squirrel here, but imitation squirrel is pretty good as well. So I have a range of those. But the other brush I will use is a smaller version, a smaller squirrel head brush, mop, I call them. And then I've got a rigger here, which is probably the cheapest and oldest all the brushes I've got. And I think, I'm trying to remember how I did my practice painting, but I think I may well use this really cheap children's brush, which I've given a really bad haircut to, chopped at it with scissors. And that might be quite useful for some of the foliage we'll be dealing with today. So paper, paints and brushes. What else do I? Oh yes, I think I ought to mention two other things. I'm using a soft pencil to draw with, and I will draw harder than I would normally for myself, so that I'm sure you can see what I'm drawing, but it matters not. I can rub it out later on. And the going just back to paints, I may or may not use some of this white gouache here, right at the end of the painting, for highlights. We'll see whether that's necessary or not. Okay, that's the conduct of the class and the equipment just covered. So let's have a look at the subject for today, which is an autumn walk or a fall walk for our American friend. I actually think the word fall is much better than autumn. I like the word fall. We ought to use it in England more often because it describes what actually happens quite well. But I'm used to using autumn here. So it's an autumn walk. And so the painting is about two things, really. One is this autumnal landscape and playing and getting the atmosphere of the light. It's probably an early morning light. It's coming over a lake this way that I'm running my hands from left to right, and it's everything shouts out about it being relatively early in the morning. The shadows are long. There's a sort of slight haze mist in all of this, particularly in the distance. And all of that is something that we will attempt to get by using soft and hard watercolors and working into wet watercolors and working on to dry and all of that sort of thing. The other thing that I think really comes out strongly in this is the play between warm and cool colors. You know, for instance, the warm colors that we see here on the foliage and in other places, particularly in the foreground, set against the cooler colors of not only the sky and the distance, but also areas around here, maybe where we're looking into the woods a little bit. So we're playing warm and cool colors off against each other to get that sort of exciting contrast. And of course, the other contrast, talking about contrast, is the darks and the lights and how we make that work. But that's, in a sense, that's really half of what this painting is about, because specifically I want to introduce, and I want you to play around to introduce figures to this landscape scene here. Now, in my practice painting, which I'll just pop in front of you for a moment, in my practice painting, I've put in a family, like a family group, including the dog. And that's what I will go for in this demonstration. But it is entirely up to you as to whether you put in 1, 2, whatever kind of figures you put. I've got them walking away from me, but you can have them walking towards you. You don't need to follow what I've done here. And similarly, you don't need to follow the composition that I'm going for. I'm going to paint more or less what I see here. Maybe trim a little bit off this side, possibly, and maybe this side. But you could, if you wanted to, decide that you're going to change your composition. I'm just going to show you. You're going to alter it in quite a where you're going to come. For instance, you're going to home in on things and just make it a more focused sort of composition like that, or you can make it square or whatever you wanted, or you can concentrate more on this side. That's entirely up to you. And that's one of the exciting things about you sending your work in, is seeing how many people just decide to compose it differently from the way that I've done so, and that's absolutely fine. But the putting in of the figures is something that I will spend a little bit of time talking about when we come to it, a bit, because I think a lot of people are a little wary or a little concerned about putting figures or painting figures in any way, whether they be on their own or putting them into some sort of a setting. Okay, so going back now to, let's get started on this. I'm going to deal with each step in time. Please get going with your own painting whenever you feel confident, whenever you feel you're ready to do so. And as I said before, I'll aim to give you time to catch up in between each of the sessions. So the 4 steps that I'm going to break this into, the first one will be, in fact, I've combined them really, will be a drawing on this paper, but it will also be, in making that drawing, it will have been thinking about the composition. So in a sense, we've already begun working on this painting by thinking about how we might compose it. So that will be the first step, and I'm going to do that in just a moment. The second step will be putting down washes, the lightest colors. These really are quite important, because they, as the painting develops, they lay the foundations for the finished painting. Strange enough, everything else is bringing darker colors into it, and that indeed is the third step, where we bring in other colors, darker colors and shadows and things like that. And the last step is about finishing off, whatever that might entail, sort of including maybe a few highlights and things like that. Right, so those are the 4 steps. And now, would it be useful if I let's see if I left this for people to see. I don't know if that would help. If I pop that there, are people able to see that reasonably well? I hope so. Shout out if you're not.
Yes, I can see it. It seems to be fine.
Okay, that's good. Okay, well, I may bring it backwards and forwards as time goes on. But hopefully my aim is not actually slavishly to follow this photograph, but to use it as a launch pad or a starting point to make the painting work how I want it to work. This is a photograph after all, and we're making a response to it. Okay, the drawing. I'm using a soft pencil. Let me bring this back here and just show. So where am I going to begin? I think the thing that interests me is where, from what point am I looking at this? You know, having taken the photograph at a certain angle, I'm up above the ground taking it. And one of the things that tells me a lot about that is the horizon. And I've got a line here, which I'm just drawing along, which is basically where this is water. I'm going to show more of the water in my painting than it does here, I think. So there's a sort of line there where it gets lost in all these trees. But that's quite useful in terms of where we're going to place our figures, as I'll show you later on. Now I'm taking that line and I'll draw it in. I'm taking that line sort of just slightly above the halfway point. I want to have enough space under here to show the path and the shadows that are coming on the path, but I also want to have enough space to show the rising trees and the sky and so forth. So a little bit more, you decide what you want to do, but a little bit more. There's where I'm going to go for my horizon line, something like that. And this is going to be below the horizon, this is going to be above the horizon. I'm also in my composition, rather than having my family group, let me show you again, rather than having my family group right down the center of it, I've taken them slightly over to the left. So I'm pushing things slightly to the left with the family. And again, that's entirely up to you. You may decide to go the other way or whatever you like. So I'll create some kind of a path. Well, let's put in, we've got some sort of distant trees here, and we've got some larger trees happening here. I don't have to follow these exactly. And then there's some water showing. So my path kind of disappears like that. And like that. And where we're going to go, it sort of just something like that. Do I want it to be as big as that? Yeah, why not? That'll do fine. And then I've got here this tree, which is in the foreground. That's going to be quite important to me because it's going to help frame my composition a bit. But I'm not going to make it quite as much of it as is made here, because apart from anything else, I want to see a little bit more of this lake. I think that could be quite interesting. So let's put in some bushes here, which, yeah, so we got some of the lake showing here, and we've got some bushes, and we've also got some further trees. If you look at your photographs, you can make up really what you'd like here, and then we'll put in some of this foliage. We've got a pretty prominent tree here, and then this tree I think is quite nice. There's a little bit of red in it, so let's have that as a tree trunk, sort of something like that, with it's coming down towards the path. And where else can we put some other trees? We've got, there's all sorts of stuff happening back here, which we'll worry about a little bit later on. So that's the idea behind the track that's running down there. Am I happy with that? Do I want to make more of this bit here? No, I think I'll just take a bit more of that piece of grass down there. So I'm just making one or two little changes as I think might work in my painting. I'm slightly off to the left here. And that's the, we've got trees coming down here. That's pretty much what I'm going to do for my, let's see, let's just have a scan. I can play around with all of this. And what's going on back here? There's a sort of bringing figures into this. Now, if you don't want to put figures in at all, that's entirely up to you. That's great. But I am I'm bringing this in as a sort of an extra little challenge to the painting. A lot will depend on where you position these figures, will depend on where your eye level is. And when you've drawn them in, you'll sort of get an idea of whether they're working or not. I find it quite useful to do something like, I'm going to have the top, I'm going to have the top, the head of whoever's the highest one, just a little bit below. I'll draw a line, a little bit below the sort of horizon line I've done there. And I find it useful if I sort of make a mark of where the height of the figures is. Let's just see how it goes if I have them. I can rub these lines out there. I'm going to put my figures in within that little frame, tram lines I've got there. Okay, that for me, that's quite helpful. Now, when I did this practice one here, before I did it, I was thinking that, you know, how can I sort this out so it works as a lesson? So I looked in the internet and I found this. The internet's full of pictures like this. So I thought, right, okay, I've got a little family group there. I'm happy to modify it, but let's take that as an idea and we'll put that family in and play around with it. As it happens, I've sort of thrown a dog in and one or two things like that. The other thing I'd say is that it would have to be a very warm autumn day for them to be walking in their t-shirts and everything, certainly in this country. So you might take it that they've got some more bulky clothes on than maybe is seen here. But that's quite useful. And one of the words I use when I sent to Bill and Lois my ideas for this, I talked about a narrative, a story. And in the most simple of ways possible, I'd quite like to sort of have a little story about this family group. The fact that there are 4 of them, in fact, I'm going to add a dog, I think, suggests that it's a family group, and you can be thinking about what the various people are doing. We've got adults and children, and I'm going to try and make the children appear as much childlike, not just the size, but also what they're doing as possible. So in drawing your figures, just a couple of little things is very useful to bear in mind. I've mentioned this sort of overall height that they're going to fit in, and they're all more or less walking along the same line like that. And the more horizontal that line is, the more, in fact, it's suggesting that they are further away from you. If you think about it, as things move away from you, they become everything, not just these people, but everything becomes more horizontal. This line, which is a line of where the trees or whatever they are meet the water, is a very horizontal line. In fact, if you were to go for a walk around there, you find it sort of jigging in and out, or, but in fact, it appears horizontal and that gives the illusion of things going further away from you. So illusion-wise, the more horizontal they are, the more they go away. But they are more or less walking along in the same line I've got here for that one. So that's one thing I mentioned. And in general, think about not making the heads too big. It's always a failing that we have. I still have myself. I end up making the heads too big. But think about the movement of the figure, and in particular, I'm quite keen. I quite like this. I'm quite keen to get these children sort of pulling it. This one's pulling a little bit because the dog's pulling. There will be a dog here. Is pulling on this child. So there is a slight sort of movement, curved movement going that way. I'll try and get this fella just slightly walking, his head tilted slightly to the left. Maybe she can be more upright. And again, this child, again, pulling a little bit, going off in that direction. So those are all little movements in the figure that I've got in mind. And in addition, and then probably the most important things then are just to link the shoulders and where the feet are in relationship to one another. So let's begin. I'll just take that, just pop that there and put this fella. So I'm going to put him, I'll put him about here. So his head is going slightly an angle. I've got to fit the whole figure in here. So he's got and then maybe more of a shoulder showing because he's being pulled by the child. I mean, generally with drawing figures, try and not make the legs too stock and thick, and think in terms more of a carrot. Okay, so let's just, his weight is thrown on his left leg down here. So it's probably going to go down like that, say, and he's got his right leg slightly bent, which is going to mean that it's going to be something more like that. So that's going to be there, and we'll deal with the child in a moment. The lady that's next to him, they may have hats on, these people as well, given that it's the fall. So the lady, I'm looking at the space between them, so I want them to be quite close and intimate in that one. So let's put her a bit lower down. I know she's got more, her head's bigger because she's got more hair, but let's, we can add that little, so we've got she's down there, and she's also holding on to that child to her left, and we'll sort of stick a coat on her. And I think I'll also throw her weight on this left leg, so that's down here. She's about level with the man, and there's a sort of gap showing. And they sort of joined at the hip there a little bit. Yeah, fair enough. And then we'll have a look at this little lad, or whoever it is. Right, he's holding on, so he's going to be about this sort of height. And what did I say? He's going to have an arm out here, and he also is this. Well, maybe it is a boy. I had a grandson yesterday, born yesterday, so that's why I'm thinking boys. Delighted. So this is my grandson when he gets older, and we'll have his weight being thrown on maybe the other leg, and then he's like that a little bit. Let's take a dog. Dogs. Now you want to draw a dog. We're looking at the dog from the back, got a tail, something like that. I mean, it's going to be obvious it's a dog because there's going to be a lead of some kind. Okay, so he's pulling a little bit on it, and then we'll bring in this child here. Maybe make this one a slightly older one. And arm outstretched, and throw the weight on the left leg again here. And they're all going to have coats on of one kind or another, so we don't have to worry too much about something like that. There's my, let's make his head a bit smaller. There we go. And they are all roughly in line with one another as it happens. And the dog's sort of training a little bit behind. So there is my figure. And if I sort of stand back and look at that and think, does that work for the landscape? Yeah, I think it does. They don't appear too small or too big. They're moving away from me here. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, let's move on now with the second part of the step of the painting, which is putting washes down. And as I mentioned, this is such an important step here. And if in doubt, keep it light. If in doubt, keep the colors light. You can always come in and make them dark a little later on. But if you make the colors too dark at this stage, and thinking about this particular scene, we've got some quite vibrant light coming, reflecting off where the sun is shining on the trees and on the grass and in the distance and all that sort of thing. And although we do have darks that we can use to set aside them, we want to try and keep the things light. And so I'll go through a range of colors and methods and colors that I'm going to use. But if you want to change them, then that's entirely up to you. So just a moment to look at my paint palette before I start using it. I'll run through the colors quickly and then I'll mention them as I use them. At the dark end, I've got this neutral tint. Another color you could use would be Payne's Gray, although that's a slightly more opaque color. Then I've got burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, which is a sort of yellow color. Then in the reds, I've got a alizarin crimson, which is sort of bluey purple red, and then a more orangey red, I've got a Windsor red. Now, again, there are many equivalent colors that you could have. Cadmium red would be one, or even vermilion if you wanted it more orangey. And then I've got three of these yellows, a new gamboge, which is quite a sort of earthy Tuscan type of yellow, a middle of the range yellow, which is Aurelian, but it's cadmium yellow. See, the difference between cadmium yellow and this is that cadmium is a more, slightly more opaque color than Aurelian, and I tend to try and keep my colors as translucent as possible, but it doesn't always work. I've got lemon here, and then I have 3 blues, a cerulean blue, which is a cool blue. We'll be using that today for to try and generate some coolness in the sky. A middle of the range cobalt, and then a French ultramarine, which is a much more reddy, almost purpley kind of blue. I have a permanent mauve, turquoise, and then a sap green here, and then a Windsor orange. I don't use that very much, not as much as I thought I was going to. A light red, which I'm beginning to use more and more. And the color that I am using more and more is this yellow ochre. And in fact, I will use it. I mostly worked in raw sienna here, but it's a little too yellow. So I've gone for this yellow ochre. And that color, I have no idea what that is. I don't even know how it got in there. So we'll ignore that for a moment. So I'll mention those as we go around. So I want this to be as wet as possible. I want the colors to merge into each other. I'm quite happy for them to do that. And at the end of the process, I want it to be a completely bone dry before I move on to the third stage. So I'm going to use a lot of water here. Now, I'm not planning on using this, not at this stage, but this spray. Some people like to spray their paper first and then work on it. I tend to prefer to use lots of water and achieve the same effect. But particularly as I'm breaking this painting into steps and slowing it down, slower than I would normally paint, it might find that to wet or revive paint in some way, I might use the spray. I'll see. I'm just letting you know I've got the spray, whether I use it or not. I'm going to use my large mop brush for this. I've got water here, which is maybe just slightly out of shot. And I'll start off working down the page a little bit. My board is actually flat, and I tend to work on upright boards when I'm on my own, but I'm doing it for the purposes of this demonstration. I'm working on something flat, and I'll put in some sky first. But let me just mention a couple of things and remind you, because I have mentioned them. Particularly talking about warm and cool colors here. I see the sky as being quite cool, and this sort of area here being relatively cool. This area here in the background, if you're putting it in, that's going to be quite cool. And then there's a lot of warmth here, and in the track and in the fields, there's a bit of warmth here as well. And these are playing off each other, hopefully, as well as using lighter and darker colors. So a lot of water in my brush. I've got it here, and I'll stand up and do this. Let's see. Let's go to my cerulean blue. This one here. This is the one which has naturally got sort of yellow in it, and that makes it sort of greeny. And then I'll pop some of that here. Now, I know I'm going to bring in some darker trees here, as I've done in this demonstration. And therefore, I'm happy to leave this area a bit lighter than I'm making this little bit here. So I don't mind doing that. I could do that by just adding a bit more water and just letting it blend in. Am I happy with that? Sort of just, yeah, something like that. So that's kind of the sky. And I'll bring some of that down here where I've exposed some of the water. All right, so lots of water. I think that's really what this is about. at this early stage, don't be frightened using water. I'm using a big moppy brush, picks up lots of water. It's chucking water around here. I think I'll go back to my blue because it's cool, and I'll just pop in something here. Maybe bring a bit of lemon yellow in. It's a bit too vibrant. It's a little bit too vibrant. So let's I'll see that. We'll see how that goes. And then I'm looking at some of these light colors here. Let's go to lemon yellow for some of those and put some of that in here. Add a bit of yellow ochre down here. I'm still playing around. I'll bring in a little bit of the, we're talking about what's the lightest thing here, so don't be frightened to keep it as light as possible. I'm going to go down to my sap green, just bring that in, mix that in with things here, and I'm happy to go over my figures. Not too green, so let's bring a bit of that's gone a bit too dark. Bring the yellow ochre in there. I don't like that. It's gone a bit too dark, so let's mix a bit of yellow ochre with a little bit of sap green and put something in here. And something in there, which, right, there's lots of water chucked around this. So I'm going to get my yellow ochre and put some of that in this area here. Make this a little greener down, oh, not too much of that, a little bit greener down in the foreground here, and let that for the track down here. I think I'll go to my yellow ochre and bring that in here, and take an Aurelian color and just bring a bit of stronger yellow, particularly in the foreground down here, a little bit. I'll add a little bit of, let's try this little red here. Is that going to be just some red in this tree, which might be useful later on, a bit more. And up here, where else do I want to put in some? We've got the splash of red there, a bit more yellow here, and in this distance it's all quite wet. Here. Try and get a distant color. I'll try a little bit of cobalt and a tiny bit of something red. Maybe this Windsor red. Yeah, something that sort of color. I'm going to bring, and because it's still wet up here, it'll let's see what that will give me. It'll merge in with the sky a little bit. Let's just see if we can get. Put a bit of. So I'm going around my paint palette, putting in. It's too dark. Let's make this a little bit lighter here, just a wee bit. I'll be playing around with light, warm yellows, cooler yellows. Where else do I need to be thinking of bringing in some more color? Let's bring in a little bit more. I'll take this burnt sienna. That's a bit dirty. It's clean. A little bit of burnt sienna. I've got a lot of water on the page there. Let's just bring in a little bit here. Where else do I need to get something light? Right, am I going to be able to make use of that in some way? Yeah, I think we're more or less there. Right, my paper's pretty wet. I've started off by putting in this cool blue, which is called cerulean here, making it lighter here, and it sort of blends in. I left this deliberately for a little bit because it was all too wet, and I moved on here. I brought in some cooler color here that looks quite vibrant to me, but it doesn't matter. That might prove useful later on because it's a contrast with warmth here. And then I brought in some yellows, the trees, bits of reds, something light, not too greeny, particularly far away, but I added a little bit of sap green. I find sap green's a really good green just to add to things. I've really used it on its own. I made the track using my yellow ochre. Let's take some of the light out of that track up there. That will be fine. There's a little bit of, I now want some light to catch hold of things here in a moment. Maybe even a bit more. The light's going to be clipping over the top of these bushes. That should be fine. And I've swept it all over the figures. Don't need to worry about painting around those just at the moment. And where the paints are mixing in, you're getting softer edges. That's absolutely fine. That's to be recommended at this stage. So we have a dry painting now, which is the light colors of the washes we put on here. And now this next stage is about bringing extra color and darkness into the painting. I'm going to work up here. Now, one of the things I mentioned at the start was this business of playing soft against hard and trying to get a feeling for the atmosphere. So I'm quite keen that this area here, up here, is particularly this area around here, the distant trees, is soft. That we don't have too many hard edges here, and I can afford to have more hard edges up around here where the trees are and in other places. So what I'm going to do with this is just I can either use a brush or I can do a little bit of spray. I'm just going to bring a little bit of water here, so and a little bit down here, and then put a color over this for the distant trees, and hope that the tops of the trees will just touch the wet water and soften them out a little bit. And also we're going to have branches hanging down here, so we don't want to get too worried about this area. So it's just this sort of area around here in the distance. And then I'll move on from there. So I don't really need very much at all. In fact, I won't even use my spray. I'll just use a brush. Okay, and I'm just going to put some water over here a little bit. I moved to using my smaller mop brush here, and I'll go back to this grey colour that someone was talking about, and I'll use cobalt, a little bit of cobalt. You can see me mixing it. I'll take a little bit of the light red. If it goes too mauvey, I can always put a little bit of yellow in too. But I'm quite happy to have it a bit mauvey, and then I'll take that here, and where it touches the water that I put on, it will just sort of soften it a little bit. I just make that a bit darker by going back to my blue and adding a little bit of something like burnt sienna. So I'm just making a darker grayer sort of color here, and quite strong. And let's pop a bit of that on there, and it will hopefully sort of work its way, blend its way in. Just to vary it a little bit. Okay, a lot of that's going to be lost over the leaves that are coming on it. So I'm moving here a little bit now. This is also a sort of soft area here, and well, just to ring the changes, I'll just give this a little squirt, or just that area, and bring in maybe some of this color that I've been mixing up here. I've got some cobalt, and now I must remember I've got water on the paper, so I can have my paint a little bit stronger than I want, and I've got some cobalt and a little bit of burnt sienna. Let's see what we're going to get with that. A bit more cobalt, and just patch in some of the. We're still keeping this quite soft. I'm using my brush in a very rough way here. And that allows me not only to get sort of marks here as if they were tree marks, but also on the other side where the lighter leaves are coming into it, I'm breaking it up so that I'm getting arbitrary marks happening here. Let's just put that in here. I'll come on down to my horizon. I'll leave that now. What have I got here? Can I just bring a bit of that darkness in here? And I'm going to bring a little bit onto this side of these more forward trees. You can see here. I'm still leaving a bit of light catching these trees here, and it's kind of painting itself a little bit still. Let's make these marks. It's some of them are harder edge than others. Right. If I want these edges to be harder here, I'm going to need to wait for that to dry a little bit. Let's just see what that's done. Yeah, we'll move on from there. So I've been using my brush a little bit like this brush, which is a sort of bad haircut, but I'm stabbing it in to make these really arbitrary marks. I'm going to bring just a little bit more darkness in there whilst it's still wet. So I'll go back to my cobalt, back to burnt sienna, so that this is quite strong, and just put something in there just to get a little bit of interest, as if yeah, there we go. It's all wet, it's all going to be merging in and painting itself. So let's move around now and bring in some interesting colors here. Now I'm going to go to this brush, which is a bad haircut brush, but as you saw with this mop brush, I can achieve very much the same sort of effect by doing that. And you can do that pretty much with any brush. I mean, some of you may have used a hake brush. You could do that by sort of painting it so you got splayed out bristles. I think the point is we're making marks here, which would probably take a month of Sundays to design yourself, but they're just sort of coming in arbitrarily. Okay, now I'm going to bring in some of the some warmer yellows and ochre colors into the trees here, and also as they are lying here, so they'll be going in against some of these light washes, but as they are lying here, I will also bring in something a bit darker in places, so that we've got a variety of marks being produced. So now, let me see if I show you what I mean. Let's take, let's have a look at a new gamboge, for instance. I don't know if that's going to be too violent. I don't know. So look, that's probably going to be all right, but I can play around with that by adding a little bit of red to it. Right, so let's get this new. So I'm working over, this is all dry at the moment, and I'm quite keen that there's some sort of red, a splay of red coming here from this forward branch. So let's just put in some of these colors here, just and leaving making sure I don't cover over all of the light that I put down on the first wash we put down. So here I think what I'll do is, having picked up this straight from the new gamboge, I'm going to add a little bit of red to it. Let's see what happens if I do that. Just make it a little more orangey, and then put that in some places, touching it. So in some places you get a sort of softness, and in other places there'll be a hardness. I'm conscious that this is suggesting a perspective of things going away from you. So okay, what else do I need to do here? Maybe a little bit under here. Make that a bit stronger still. I'm using my mop brush. I'm not using the bad haircut. There are a few little, we've got some differences in color, which is quite nice. Just a little bit there. I don't want to lose too much of the light that I've left here, because that's important that shines through. So I'll go to this bad haircut brush, because I seem to be ignoring it, and pick up some of this and work. I'm going to a little bit of new gamboge, a lot more burnt sienna, and let's come in around this side of this area. I want to be cooler and darker, so I can afford to bring some of that down here. There's no exact science in this. I'm hoping to leave out enough light areas for this strong tree colors in this foreground. So I'm looking at my photograph wherever it might help me.
I've just noticed a question, somebody asking what was added to New Gamboge?
Well, you could use something like cadmium yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna with it, or a little bit of light red. It's really just the medium yellow, which is aurelian or cadmium yellow, but it's got a bit more red in it. That is all. Right, let's move down to now. This is all wet here a little bit still, so I think I'll pop in my very strong red that I want, a little bit of alizarin crimson, maybe bring in a bit of burnt yeah, that's quite good. Let's just make that good and strong. So I've just gone for a red and added some burnt sienna to it. So I want to have a little bit of flashes of red, bring some in here. Now I'm going to get a darker color, which I'll use some cobalt, and I'll mix it in with this and bring it into some areas here. And when I'm painting, I'm deliberately leaving lighter areas, drier areas, so that I can stab in some of these darks, and then I'll get a combination of hard edges and soft edges. Let's bring a bit more just here. Well, looking at this tree, maybe make this a bit darker on that side. Now, this area of green that I've got down here, so I think I'll take this color, add a bit more blue to it maybe, and use my other brush a bit and suggest that there are some trees in the background here. Let's just put those in. It's a little bit of a look at what's happening and think about where you want to make it light, where you want to make it darker. For these things here, I want to make them a bit darker, so I'll pick up some more of that blue and red, and I'll just drop them in here. I can come back and alter that a little bit later on, but I'm just suggesting there's a sort of, you can see through the woods a little bit, but okay, let's see what we can do here. And don't forget, if you put something dark against something light, it makes the lighter appear lighter. So I've just brought in something as if we're looking through the trees a little bit there. I'll tie these in with shadows a little later on. All right, so I think that's about as much as I want to put in here just at the moment. In a moment, I'm going to move over to here and bring in some extra colors, and then I'm going to start bringing shadows across the whole thing and see what we have left over from all of that. But before I do that, I'll go to my burnt umber, which is this one. Mix that in with something I've got here, and maybe just make some sort of a suggestion at this stage of some of the tree trunks. Yeah, we'll come back to that a little later. Right, I'm moving over to this area here, doing much the same sort of thing. So let's go back to my new gamboge and bring a bit of darkness here, leaving the lighter areas of that I put in when I did the wash, just to suggest that there's light coming in. I'll add a bit of, so I just got some, I got some new gamboge. I've sort of put it in with what was already mixed there. Now I'll bring in something a little more red here, and again using marks which you get by the rough bits of your brush, and I'll put in and whilst this is a little bit wet, let's get something dark. I'm using my cobalt, a little bit of burnt sienna, a bit more cobalt, and put some marks here. That's these sorts of bushes and things like that are okay. Well, it's quite a lot of color gone in here, and I've got this. I think I've got sort of a fair bit of softness here. It's harder edged here. It's warm, cool. I've put in some. A lot of this is against the light. Some colors in here, and I think what I'll do now is bring in some shadows, because the shadows are being cast from here. I'll take them across to suggest that the shadows are being thrown this way, under the trees a little bit, and from the trees a little bit here, from also from the people and from what's going on here. Before I do that, yes, just let's, we are in the fall of the autumn. We've got lots of leaves on the ground, so let's bring in some of those around here and sort of scattered around here a little bit. So I'll before I bring in the shadows, I'll go back to something like New Gamboge, a little bit of red with it maybe, and we can start put some of these colors scattered around as we can see them. And they sort of tail off a little bit as we go into the distance. So at the moment I'm popping in one color. I'm going to add some reds and browns to it just to, I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're just, and as things go away from you, you don't see them quite so much. So I'm going to bring in some, get a bit of red, maybe even a little bit of crimson, and just touch it in some areas. And throw a few leaves, starting off with them being light, using the light colors, bring them onto here, as if they've sort of collected around here a little bit, because the ground goes up. Let's bring some more here. So these are quite arbitrary marks. You put in as many as you like. We're going to end up putting shadows over this. So, and then having, as I did here before, I'll bring in some other colors, reds, maybe a few browns. Let's bring in things up into the foreground. Do I need to do any more? Why not? And I'm very much using the sort of the rough bits of my brush to make these marks. Let's cook up something a bit redder. Don't need to put too much water in, but there is water on the paper. There's water on the paint I've just put in. Just bring in some redder marks. A scattering of leaves. I remember I talked about things getting flatter as they go away, so we can put sways of color a little bit, as this is in the distance. We're not looking down on individual leaves. We're more picking up the sort of a carpet of colors. Put some of those in. Right, so you can have hours of fun putting in a few leaves here. And at some point we've got to stop. let's stop now. If we want to do, we could add some more in later on, but that's given some suggestion of leaves. Now I'll go and deal with bringing the shadows in and creating a little bit more form. I'll work around the figures at this stage now. I'm going to do the figures right at the end, I think. Yeah, so I'll work around the figures. So a color for the shadows. Well, let's go to our cobalt blue. We've used that quite a bit. And I suppose I'd like the shadows to be on the bluey side, but they're going to be stronger here than they are back here. And that's something we should bear in mind. And also the shadows here are going to be what's thrown from these branches that we put here. That and this are going to throw the shadows across the path, and you'll get more of a shape to the shadows here, but they'll flatten out. Remember, I talked about things becoming more and more horizontal. They'll flatten out as we go back. So let's maybe deal with softer here, and then we'll make them a little harder edge as we go on. So I've got a blue, which is a cobalt, and let's just put a little bit of burnt sienna in. What am I getting there? I'm getting something like that. It's not too bad. It'll lighten as it dries, and I think I'm going to be fairly happy with it. Here, but before I do, I'm just looking at this area which is quite rough ground. Do I want to bring any more into it? No, we'll see how it goes and play with it. So that color I've got here, I think I'll water down a little bit. Let's just water that down a little bit. And I'm using my small wash brush. I'm using it so I can get a bit of a point out of it. You see, I can get quite a good point out of that little brush. And I'm going to, if you look at the photograph, I'm going to take some of these shadows along, leaving little gaps, and bring them down to sort of roughly, bring the shadows down and then start making the shadow a little bit stronger by adding more pigment to it. So let's see. It's not a million miles from the color that I put in here as well, so that might be quite useful. So let's see if we can. That'll probably be okay. Quite like the idea if you've got glimpses of shadows and light coming through. I'll take some of these shadows up at the sides here, but maybe use my finger just to soften the edges a little bit here. Okay. Now they sort of move under the tree a little bit, these shadows. So if I use the rough end of my brush, it'll suggest some of the overhanging foliage, I hope. Let's take that in here. And now we're putting the shadows where we can see them under the trees and into the background a bit more. Bear in mind, we've got a tree that runs across here. So, and take this area. Is in shadow. Right, let's bring the shadows up a bit closer and make them a wee bit darker, I think. So take them around this lady's head. We want little bits of light catching these figures. So if you've got some darkness behind the figure, it will help the light to catch up. So I've put a little bit of shadow there, and I'll put a little bit of shadow there. If you see what I mean, it's it will be useful when we come to put the figures in. Okay, let's move on now. There are shadows cast from, I can make these shadows a bit stronger as I go on. So see the shadows are cast. I'll do the same with this lad here, put a little bit of darkness around. The shadows are cast. In these bushes. And because they're going over fairly rough ground, there's nothing straightforward about them. They're straighter at the back here, but not so much here. I'm still using this paint here, and I think I can make my shadows a bit stronger. I'm gonna have to mix up some more shadow area. That's fine. Right, mix up some more shadow. I use cobalt and a little bit of burnt sienna. How's that going? Is that gone a bit too brown? It's okay. A bit stronger, maybe. Okay. And I'm going to start taking shadows across across this area here. So we've got a tree and some branches, so we're going to have some shadows cast. There's a little rise, maybe. Remember here, so we've got some shadows in that lot, and where should we go? And a few more shadows. This is a bit stronger, suggesting there's across they go, across the track. Going to be a little bit brave at this stage. Let's make these a bit stronger. Shadows here, break them up a bit more. Should we do some more shadows? Let's okay, I'm going to mix up a bit more. Let's work on the people and the shadows going up here now. I'm going back to my cobalt blue, burnt sienna. Again, I don't want to make it too brown. That's going a little bit too brown. There we are. And let's take, looking at my, let's take some of the shadows up here now, coming that tree. It's not absolute straight line, it's even sort of broken up a little bit with all the grasses and the leaves, and breaking up a bit like this. It's bring in some shadows here. I'll make these a bit softer, I think. Right, people, we have to imagine these shadows. They're going to go, they're going to go something like that still. So if the shadows are going uphill a little bit, you can do that. We've got some from the dog, and we put some behind the dog. I'm not dealing with the figures. We can link the figures in with these shadows a little bit later. We've got some. Now, do we need to make the shadows longer at all with the people? Yeah, a little bit maybe. But they do get also, they get softer as they go away from you. I'm going to make the shadows a bit longer for the people. Okay, that will do for the moment. And put some shadows just behind some of the leaves where the leaves have cast shadows. Might be helpful to give the suggestion of light falling on the leaves. Right, we're getting, and the ground is quite uneven, so we can maybe play on that a little bit. Let's bring in some. I think I'm going to make these shadows a little bit longer here. And bring a shadows in here. I think it will connect with the foliage we're going to put up there. So I've almost got to the end of this stage. What's that like? Okay. Here I'm putting it in. It's in a sense, it's what I leave out, the little bits I leave out, which are going to be quite important in suggesting the unevenness of the ground. And I'm just making a few marks to suggest that the ground is a bit uneven. If you look on your photographs, you'll see that. And in some places, this is a much stronger mixture. You're going to drop a stronger mixture just next to some of these areas, and they'll blend in a bit. So it's not all just exactly the same. Right, I think we've got to a stage now where we can leave that. For this last stage, it is very much about what emphasis you want to place on things. For instance, we have put shadows down here and have suggested the light and everything that comes on, but it might be that you want to just put a little bit more emphasis in the very dark, deepest shadow areas, just to bring it out alive a little bit. We're going to bring these branches in. Oh, which reminds me, of course, there is another brush I'm going to use. I've forgotten about that. I'm going to use this dagger or sword. I can't remember what they call it. This is also a squirrel brush, and it's like a rigger in a sense, but it holds much more water, and it's even more unpredictable in terms of where you're going to get your marks. So if you haven't used one of these before, whatever, I'll show you how I'm going to use that. And as with all these things, you can make brushes work for you and do all sorts of things. That's why I think of the three things I mentioned to you at the start, paper, paints, and brushes, I mentioned them in that order of importance. I think the paper, good cotton rag paper and everything, is something you can't replicate. You can't in some way make the paper absorbent as this paper is by buying a cheaper paper. The paints are next. You can get away with, these are all professional artist quality standard paints, but you don't have to have those. You could be using weaker student quality paints, but you're still going to make the painting work. And finally, the brushes, you can make a brush do pretty much anything you want to do. I mean, if I was stranded on a desert island and I just was allowed 2 brushes, I'd have that brush. But equally, going back to what I showed you before, I could probably make do with that brush, although I don't tend to use it very often for these demonstrations. So you can make use of a brush to do all sorts of things. Okay, this area is something that I want to do because that throws a lot of these shadows that are going in here. I want to do the figures in here and any other little bits of emphasis or depth that I want to bring in to what's happening here. I'm going to try and leave this bit as much as possible free because there's a light in there, but I might bring in something in this dark area that you can see in the photograph as well. So that and then any other little dark bits or highlights, which is probably the last thing I'll do of the lot. So I'll do this first. I'll work up the top left here, and I'm going to go to my dagger brush here. Let me show you what I did in the practice painting. This is up against the light quite a lot, so you're not seeing a great deal of individual color, but there's still enough there, hopefully, to suggest that we have autumnal fall type leaves here. It's about as abstract way of making marks and painting as we'll achieve in this picture here. So I just want to make some statement about the leaves that are here. And I think that helps frame this whole picture, just bring a sort of a frame to it and a balance to what's happening here. So why don't I do that first, and then I'll move on to the others. So here we are. I've got my dagger brush. When it's wet, it looks like that, a bit like a dagger. I will. I'm just going to this area where I was using all these warm colours, but I'll let's put in some burnt sienna. I don't want them as light as that. There's some burnt sienna. That's probably even too bright for the colours here. So I'll add a little bit of ultramarine blue. It's a warmer blue. Yeah, so I've got a sort of a brown colour here. So if we can put some, now, as I said, this is pretty unpredictable how you paint. And I want to make marks which suggest leaves, and then I'll tie that together a little bit with the things that suggest branches and twigs. So if we yeah, it's probably going to work. So I put some marks here. You see what I'm doing? I'm going to bring in some darker colours to this in a moment, so it's not all of them will stay as light as this. And that was one of the reasons why, when I started this painting with the wash, I left this area in the sky. I left it a little bit lighter because I knew I was going to bring in these leaves here. So let's bring that down across here, break across here. You can bring it down as low as you want to. It's okay, so that's quite a lot of light brown there. And now I'll go to this, maybe add some more ultramarine blue. So I'm just going in to make a sort of darker, sludgier color here. Bring in burnt sienna or raw sienna, something like that, a bit more dark, and it's quite strong paint, this, and it's not, I mean, it's a wet enough brush, but it's not overly wet. So let's bring, and
someone's asking, are you using the point or the side of the dagger? Because
I'm using the point with this one. Okay. If can you see how I'm doing that? And I'm in fact, I'll make the paint a bit stronger in pigment wise with a little less water, because I've got a lot of water already on those leaves I put down. So if I, yeah, can you see that? I'm just, and I want it to sort of look a bit different, but where it's touching some of the leaves, it'll sort of merge in a bit. Okay. And my hand's over what I'm doing, but if I were left-handed, you'd probably see that a bit better. But so, can you see I'm making these marks, and I'll go back to that color. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit of neutral tint. It's not a color I use very much on its own, but I added to it just to make that a bit darker. And let's just bring in something which might suggest a few branches. There's nothing scientific about this. We're just making marks. Can you see a few little branches? I'd do it with my left hand if I thought it was going to work, but I'm not sure it will. And you put in really as much as you want to do. Let's make this area here. I do it with my left hand. Let's make this area just a little bit darker, so it's not as if it's there. Shall we? Right, call that a day. And let's see if that's enough. If you want to drop that down over into the water, you can do so. Let's leave it at that. And I'll do the figures now, and then we'll finish off the rest. Let's do the figures. I'm probably not going to use that brush again, as nice as it is. And for the figures, I'll go to my little mop brush. Okay, they're all walking away. They've all probably got hats on or something like that on. Give it's a fall. I can make. I can give them probably more bulky clothes, and sort of choose the colours. I'm going to bring a red colour into one of them. Sort of tie in with this, just a combination of the reds and so let's go from that. Right, what have I got here? I can use what I've got here. Let's take a bit of that and I'll do them and put that in for the man here. Just give him a red jacket of some kind. Now the light is coming this way, so I'm happy to have him a little bit lighter red on that side. In fact, I'll even try and leave a little bit to show where the light's catching him. So let's just have him a little bit light red. He's got a arm down here, and he's got a jacket here. So let's see where we do that. And I think that the less you can actually paint in, the better. So you've got some sort of a jacket there. Give him some sort of trousers. I'll pick up a dark blue of some kind and put that here. Again, I'm conscious all the time of the light coming from this side, so we'll and I'll add some of that blue onto this side where the shadows may be. Okay, something like that. Just suggesting that he's maybe bending his leg a little bit. So that was one of the things I said to you is try not to make the legs too stocky, and I'm allowing the darker color to flow into the color that I put there. Let's have a look at his lady wife. I'll pick up some. I assume it's his wife and not somebody else's, but I'll put. Let's give her some dark hair, or I'll give her a hat at some point. We'll leave a little bit of light showing there. Let's give her a jacket of this sort of ochre-y type jacket. And some blue trousers. You choose whatever you want, however you want to dress your figures. And I'll put in some, as I did with the man, I'll just put in some shadow down this side where, I mean, they're both holding hands. They're very much in the shadows. Let's add a bit of darkness to that leg, and then it sort of links in a little bit with the shadows we put on the ground. Okay, right, let's look at these little youngsters. I'm going to treat this one as a girl and give her a pink jacket. It's very sexist of me, I know, but let's put something pink in there. The less you can stipulate, the better it is, the less precise it is. So let's add a bit of something dark to her on her head on this side. She's sort of linking hands with her mum a little bit, isn't she? And then we put something dark here. And the boy and his dog. I'll make him blue. And so I hope you can see that I'm just touching in the colours here and letting them bleed in a little bit. Let's give him some black paints of some kind and take that down here. What's happening with his leg? On the dog. Right, this is my attempt at painting a collie dog. Collie dog. Sort of bent tail goes around like that. Fine looking collie dog. Right, I've got something black in here, so let's pop a little bit of black there and there. Let's see. Okay. Those are the people. What about a red hat? Red hat. And, I think that's enough from the people. Let's move on them. So right, I'm going to bring in some other darker areas here. Everything from little, as I explained, sort of patches of the very dark bits underneath the hedge here to little emphasis on the darkest bits of the shadows, maybe just coming from where their foot touches the ground and maybe a little bit in here. And I'll bring in some branches in these trees and then touch in some shadows on these tree stumps that I put in, and stand back and look at it and see if there's anything else to do. And I will probably bring in one or two little highlights to show the light that's on the figures. All right, let's go for that. I'll see how much I can get away with using this same mop, but I'll probably switch to my rigger at some stage. Now, here we go. Let's mix up something dark. So I'm going to pick up my ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Let's just see what I get out of that. If I want to darken this anymore, I can drop in some neutral tint. and also if I'm going to bring up and do anything darker in here, if at any stage I feel that I just want to soften some areas, I could always give it a little squirt of water if necessary. I want to try and keep this distance as little contrasty as possible to make up for the extra contrast I've got here. So let's pick up this. I mean, you can use whatever you like. You'd use cobalt and some sort of a brown or something like that. But I've gone for this, and I'm going to just emphasize one or two points. Again, if I'm going to see lots of shadows and things, shapes and shadows, they're going to be up nearer to me. It's I'm switching to my rigger to bring in some little arbitrary marks. Going back to my stronger colors here. I'm only doing this in support of the shadows I've got. I don't want to go over the shadows completely. Again, the rigger is quite good because you're not necessarily getting any precise marks. Where we've got a little fold in the ground here, I think I can bring in the suggestion of some slightly darker areas. Okay, that's probably enough there. I'll go to the figures, just where I want to emphasize anything at this stage. Do I want to do it a bit more? Let's give her a handbag of some sort. And so touching in where I think I just need to, particularly where the sort of feet are just touching the ground, it helps to just root them on the ground a bit more, even the dog. The lead. All right, just come on back here and see if I need to do anything back here. I don't think I need to do anything as dark as that, but let's put a couple of little branches maybe. So I mix something lighter with that from within the palette. Let's go back to my darker colors here, bring in my dark. I've used ultramarine, blue, and burnt sienna. So let's There's some shadow down the side of these tree stumps, and I'll use a sort of a more sludgy mixture for the branches and see how I get on with that. So we've got some what have we got here? Branches. What? I could even use that daggers there for some of these, but I'll just use the rigger, and I don't want to make these too solid, these branches, and we're only seeing suggestions of them anyway. Oh. I told you it was an old brush, it's falling apart. Right. Again, you put in whatever you want to do, is how much of this you want to, whatever marks you want to make, which suggest the branches. If in doubt, put in fewer than you need. You can always look at it again after you've had a drink or a cup of tea or something like that and decide. You can come back to it. Let me just leave it at that point. I may or may not put some more in. I'm coming back to this area here, and I just want to push that area into the background a bit more. Now, how am I going to do that? Yeah, I want to lose it. In the photograph, it's much darker and it's lost. So I think I can do something about making it darker. Now, what about just giving it a little squirt and put in some, just this area here. And going to my dark mixture, bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. I can add some neutral tint to that if I want, and right. There's a possibility that I might come back to that later and just put an overall wash of something darker, but I'm going to make this area a little bit darker here. So I'll pick up something dark and sludgy and just put it over like that, just so that it gets lost a little bit in the background. And I've got a feeling some of these areas here are a bit too bright. But I'll tell you what, I'll just dry those and then go over and show you what I mean. Finish off with some highlights and we're done. One moment. Okay, so I'll pick up this darkness that I put here, I'll pick up some of that. And a little bit of water, and then take it over the whole thing. I just wanted to create something a bit darker in the background there. Okay, yeah, okay. There's, you can still see the play of colors going on, but I just felt that those yellows or yellow ochres or whatever I put in there were just a little bit too strong. And to finish off, I could go around and just make a few little dark, I'll show you what I have in mind. One or two little dark sort of just marks. Just one or two little marks, just even in the flat areas to break that up. Okay, that's possible. I don't know whether I'm going to do any more of that, but what I'm going to do now, and this is me finished, I've just dipped my brush into my drinking water to something clean. Pick up this white that I told you about before, which is gouache, and see whether it would help if I just added a little bit of one or two little highlights here. It's very easy to overcook this and do too much, but it's some suggestion of the light on the shoulders. Do I need to do any more? Collie dog. And then, you know, it could be that one or two little marks, particularly if you're putting it against something dark, might just add to a few little glints. Again, you do too much and it kind of looks a bit overworked. Just where catching the odd leaf, maybe his lead. Right, that is where at that point I'm abandoning the picture. Now it could be that I'll go around when it's dry and get my eraser and take out some of these lines. Depends on how much you want to do that. But I did draw them in quite heavily, so I might do something on that. But that's the painting demonstration finished.